Imagine a place on our planet that is so remote, so profoundly isolated, that the closest human beings to it are not even on Earth. They are the astronauts aboard the International Space Station, orbiting 400 kilometers above. This place is real. It is hidden in the vast, empty expanse of the South Pacific Ocean. Geographers call it Point Nemo, but to the world space agencies, it is known by a much more chilling name: the Spacecraft Cemetery. Beneath these turbulent, dark blue waters lies the final resting place of humanity's greatest technological achievements. Hundreds of satellites, massive cargo spacecraft, and entire space stations that once pioneered our journey into the stars. They did not just vanish. They were deliberately guided here, sent to die in the loneliest spot on Earth. But why does this cemetery exist? How do space agencies crash a structure the size of a football field into a precise location in the ocean? And more importantly, what is actually happening to these toxic, radioactive ruins 4,000 meters beneath the surface? To understand the mystery of the Spacecraft Cemetery, we must first look at the sky. Right now, as you watch this video, there is an invisible crisis unfolding above our heads. For decades, humanity has been launching rockets into orbit. We wanted communication, global positioning, and weather tracking. But every launch left something behind. Spent rocket stages, dead satellites, even tiny flecks of paint moving at 28,000 kilometers per hour. Today, there are tens of thousands of pieces of space debris orbiting. Scientists call this a ticking time bomb. If a single piece of junk hits an active satellite, it creates thousands of new fragments. This could trigger a chain reaction known as the Kessler syndrome, a catastrophe that would destroy our entire orbital infrastructure and trap humanity on Earth forever. To prevent this nightmare, space agencies had to find a solution. They needed a way to clean up the sky. For smaller satellites, the solution is simple. They are commanded to lower their orbit and burn up completely in the Earth's atmosphere. The intense friction turns metal into dust in a matter of seconds. But for the giants of space, for structures weighing tens or hundreds of tons, the atmosphere is not enough. Huge pieces of titanium, stainless steel, and fuel tanks will always survive the fiery re-entry. They will fall back to Earth. And if they fall on a city, the results would be devastating. The world needed a target. A planetary trash can where no one could ever get hurt. In 1992, a Croatian-Canadian survey engineer named Hrvoje Lukatila used a computer program to find it. He wanted to calculate the exact point on Earth that was furthest from any coast. The coordinates he found were 48 degrees, 52.6 minutes south,
eyes
and
on the decommissioning burn
123 degrees,
sequence.
23.6
We are go for the
minutes
maneuver.
west. He named it Point Nemo. In Latin, Nemo means no one. It is a name that could not be more accurate. If you were to stand at Point Nemo today, you would be surrounded by nothing but water for thousands of miles. The nearest land masses are over 2,600 kilometers away. To the north is Ducie Island, a tiny, uninhabited coral atoll. To the northeast is Easter Island. And to the south is Mar Island, a frozen cliff on the coast of Antarctica. Point Nemo is so far from civilization that no commercial shipping lanes go near it. No airplanes fly over it. It is a true oceanic desert. But its isolation is not just geographical. It is also biological. The ocean currents in this part of the Pacific rotate in a massive circle, creating the South Pacific Gyre. This gyre blocks cooler, nutrient-rich water from entering the region. Without nutrients, there is no plankton. Without plankton, marine life cannot survive. There are no fish here, no whales, no coral reefs. It is a vast blue void where nothing lives. And that makes it the absolute perfect place to crash a dying spaceship. Since 1971, international space agencies have used Point Nemo as their designated impact zone. Over 300 spacecraft now rest on the ocean floor here. The majority of them belong to Russia, including the legendary Mir Space Station. Mir was a triumph of human engineering, weighing over 120 tons. For 15 years, it served as a floating laboratory in the cosmos. But by the year 2001, it was old, rusting, and losing power. Russia had to bring it down. The world watched in nervous anticipation. If the navigation math was off by even a fraction of a degree, Mir could have struck land. On March 23, 2001, Russia fired the station's thrusters one last time. Mir plunged into the atmosphere over the Pacific. Witnesses in Fiji saw brilliant streaks of light tearing across
We
the
have green
morning
across
sky.
the board, Commander.
It looked like a dozen shooting stars moving
Initiating
together.
docking
The
clamps.
station broke apart under extreme heat and aerodynamic pressure, but a massive portion of its structure survived the re-entry. Over 20 tons of twisted metal tore through the air and slammed into the waters of Point Nemo. It sank into the darkness, never to be seen by human eyes again. But how exactly do scientists manage to hit this tiny point from hundreds of miles in space? The process is called a controlled deorbit, and it is a masterpiece of orbital mechanics. When a spacecraft reaches the end of its life, operators on Earth do not just let it drop. They wait for the perfect orbital alignment. They need the spacecraft's trajectory to pass directly over the South Pacific Ocean. Once the path is locked, they execute a series of engine burns. These burns are not designed to push the spacecraft toward Earth. Instead, they act as brakes. By firing the thrusters in the opposite direction of travel, they slow the vehicle down. As the speed drops, gravity takes over. The spacecraft's orbit decays, bending lower and lower until it grazes the upper layers of the atmosphere. This is where the real violence begins. At an altitude of about 120 kilometers, the air becomes thick enough to create immense friction. The spacecraft is traveling at nearly 8 kilometers per second. The air molecules in front of it cannot move out of the way fast enough. They become intensely compressed. This compression generates temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Celsius. Solar panels are
Внимание,
ripped
это
away
алмаз.
instantly.
Параметры
Wiring
стабильны,
melts.
продолжаем
Aluminum
движение по
structures
орбите.
liquefy and vaporize, but the strongest components hold together. Fuel tanks made of reinforced titanium, engine blocks, heavy structural rings. These pieces act like meteors. They drop from the sky at supersonic speeds, spreading out across a long, narrow strip of ocean. Space agencies call this the debris footprint. This footprint can be up to 1,000 kilometers long and several dozen kilometers wide. Because Point Nemo is so empty, this massive hazard zone threatens no one. But the history of the cemetery is not without its close calls. Before Point Nemo was widely adopted, space objects fell with terrifying unpredictability. In 1979, America's first space station, Skylab, was dying. NASA lost control of its orbit sooner than expected due to unexpected solar activity. They could not guide it precisely to the empty Pacific. As Skylab re-entered the atmosphere, it began breaking apart later than calculated. Instead of crashing into the ocean, debris rained down across the Australian outback. Massive chunks of oxygen tanks and structural beams slammed into the desert near the town of Esperance. Miraculously, no one was injured. The local municipality even issued NASA a $400 fine for littering, which was paid decades later by an American radio host. This incident taught the world a permanent lesson. We could no longer leave the return of massive spacecraft to chance. Controlled deorbiting became the golden standard, and Point Nemo became the busiest junkyard on Earth. Among the wreckage down, there are dozens of Russian Progress cargo ships, European automated transfer vehicles, Japan's HTV supply craft, and even old Soviet-era military space stations from the top-secret Almaz program. But the cemetery is about to receive its most famous resident yet, the International Space Station. The ISS is the largest man-made structure ever placed in space. It weighs nearly 450 tons and is as wide as an American football field. For over 25 years, it has been a symbol of global cooperation, permanently inhabited by scientists from around the world. But the ISS cannot last forever. The harsh environment of space has taken a heavy toll on its structure. Extreme temperature swings from minus 150 degrees to plus 120 degrees have caused the metal to fatigue. Micrometeorites have left tiny cracks in the windows and hulls. The modules are leaking air, and the costs of maintenance are skyrocketing. NASA and its international partners have officially announced the end. In January 2031, the International Space Station will be decommissioned, and its final destination is already locked. Point Nemo. Because of its unprecedented size, crashing the ISS will be the most complex and dangerous deorbit operation in human history. NASA cannot use standard cargo ship thrusters to slow it down. They will need a custom-built spacecraft, a massive deorbit vehicle, to push the station out of its orbit. The re-entry will be a spectacular, terrifying event. As the ISS hits the atmosphere, the solar arrays will bend and snap like twigs. The massive trusses will twist and tear apart. The individual modules, where astronauts once lived and worked, will explode from internal pressure. A rain of fiery debris, weighing tens of tons, will scream across the Pacific sky. It will be a historic, bittersweet end to humanity's greatest orbital home. But this raises a critical question that few people are asking. What happens after the fire goes out? What is left when these multi-million-dollar machines slam into the ocean and sink for kilometers down? To answer this, we must look at the environmental reality of the deep sea. When we think of a cemetery, we think of graves that remain quiet and unchanged. But the deep ocean floor is an incredibly hostile environment. At a depth of 4,000 meters, the water pressure is immense. It is equivalent to the weight of an elephant standing on your thumb. Any hollow structures that survive the impact and fill with air are crushed instantly by the weight of water. The water temperature is barely above freezing, hovering around 2 degrees Celsius. And there is absolute, crushing darkness. You might think that dropping high-tech waste into this pristine environment would cause an ecological disaster. Spacecraft are filled with highly toxic materials. Rocket fuels like hydrazine are incredibly corrosive and poisonous to living tissue. Many satellites carry heavy metals like lead, cadmium, and beryllium. Some older Soviet satellites even carried small nuclear reactors powered by enriched uranium. Where did all that toxic material go? According to oceanographers and naval scientists, the danger is surprisingly low. First, any remaining rocket fuel is usually vaporized during the heat of re-entry or explodes upon impact with the surface. Second, the heavy metals and structural components are made of highly stable materials like titanium and stainless steel. In the cold, oxygen-poor depths of Point Nemo, these metals corrode at an incredibly slow rate. It will take thousands of years for a titanium fuel tank to break down in the deep sea. And because Point Nemo is a biological desert, there are almost no marine organisms to absorb these toxins into the food chain. The vast emptiness that protects humans on land also protects biology in the sea. In fact, some scientists argue that the spacecraft wreckage might create something unexpected: artificial reefs. In other parts of the ocean, sunken ships and old oil rigs become havens for marine life. Corals, anemones, and deep-sea crabs use the hard metallic structures as homes to hide from currents and predators. However, because Point Nemo has so few nutrients, this process happens at a microscopic pace. For now, the ruins of our space age sit in perfect, silent isolation, a museum of human ambition buried in total darkness. But the story of the space cemetery does not end with the ISS. As we look toward the future, the entire philosophy of space exploration is shifting. We are entering the era of reusable rockets. Companies like SpaceX have proven that we no longer need to throw away rocket boosters after a single launch. They can fly back to Earth, land on a drone ship, and fly again. This technology is expanding to satellites as well. Future space stations are being designed with modular components that can be replaced individually. Instead of crashing an entire station into the ocean, we will simply replace the old rooms with new ones. We are learning to recycle in orbit. Furthermore, international laws are becoming stricter. The United Nations and global space agencies are pushing for a zero-debris policy. Spacecraft of the future will be required to have automated systems that ensure they burn up 100% in the atmosphere, leaving absolutely nothing behind. This means that the era of the giant spacecraft crash is coming to an end. The International Space Station might be one of the last megastructures to ever join the graveyard at Point Nemo. But until that day comes, the cemetery remains active. It is a profound monument to our journey into the unknown. Every piece of metal resting in that deep ocean trench represents a moment when humans dared to push past the boundaries of our world. They are the machines that connected continents, the sensors that predicted devastating storms, and the laboratories that showed us how to live among the stars. They spent their lives orbiting high above the clouds, looking down at our blue planet. And now, their journey has brought them back to the deepest, quietest corner of that very same Earth, left alone in the dark, where no one can ever disturb them. At Point Nemo, the loneliest place on Earth,